Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 277 of the show. It's going to be a regular podcast, and we're going to be focused on reviewing The Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer this time out. I'm going to be your main host, as usual, Morgan Airspeed Prime, and joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, straight away, I suppose we probably need to address, why are we doing the comic now when the novel has been out kind of a bit longer and we usually do things in order? Mainly just because whatever way it's worked out, all the publishers have ended up basically releasing all of the new Avatar content this year within the space of basically a month. So we got the Reckoning of Roku, we got the Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer, then Magpie dropped the RPG book, the Uncle Iroh Adventure Guide on us, and My Cabbages came out earlier this week as well. So everything that's new Avatar this year has come out between July and August. So it's been pretty crazy trying to cover that on the channel, let alone trying to organize all these podcasts. So to make it so that the comic doesn't just disappear in the middle of everything, we're going to do this first, and then we have the time to cover the novel, which is going to take a lot longer to get through in upcoming podcasts. So you will see Reckoning of Roku coverage. It's just going to be from basically next podcast going forward. But I suppose, what are your thoughts on this, the situation we find ourselves in, where we go from 0 to 100, everything Avatar all at once, as has kind of been the case quite a bit with publishing?
Yeah, it really does feel that way, right? Because I don't know. I mean, you don't think that they're trying to coordinate it in that such a way that everything comes in one go, especially if we're considering there's supposed to be some sort of oversight. But it just seems with the way that they do the publishing and the delays and everything and stuff, it just really got lumped together here. End of the summer, beginning of fall, and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's cool that we're getting content and stuff. We're always fans of that as well, as long as it's pretty good to some degree. So I'm thankful that we're getting some of it now. But yeah, it is a bit much for those who are covering it in real time.
Yes, so we do have stuff to talk about. It's just it has happened all at once. We could have done with some of this stuff in April, May, when the Netflix Avatar hype was dying down and we didn't really have anything, but that's what happens with delays. This comic that we're discussing today was meant to be out in May, but delays have caused it to be August, and everything's happened in that sense. But we'll get to talking about the comic shortly. There is some news still to cover, because it's been a while since the last podcast, meaning that we haven't actually covered the San Diego Comic-Con news. Now, the reason we haven't necessarily been in a huge rush to cover that is just that there was news, but it wasn't anything, I would say, hugely substantial. It was very much the obvious announcements, and there was nothing, I think, inherently new in what we got. So the main news coming out of San Diego Comic-Con, given that we had two panels, we had a Braving the Elements podcast panel and a publishing panel, we basically got one announcement at each of the panels. I think the way it worked, if I remember correctly, was that they announced the second Roku novel at the podcasting panel, which was a bit weird because it was kind of half publishing panel as well. So we have Chronicles of the Avatar Book 6, which is called Avatar The Last Airbender, The Awakening of Roku, also by Randy Rabai, so he's staying on board at least for one other book. We have publication dates going to be July 15th, 2025, so the same rough window. It's coming out in July, so very consistent with the novels like they have been for quite a while. Other than that, we have a placeholder cover and placeholder description, which doesn't have any information to go on. So it's just that the book has been announced, we know when it's coming out, the obvious kind of stuff here, which is good. We always want that confirmation of is it a duology? Yes, they're continuing to do that. But any thoughts on this very quick announcement for the next Chronicles of the Avatar?
Yeah, I guess I'm not too surprised that, they were ready to announce it, considering that when they seem to be on it and they have, people in line for things, they're pretty good with keeping us sort of in the loop on the books so far. So no, I'm glad that they got announced. I mean, yeah, when they announce it, it's kind of odd, but it's cool that we're getting it. I mean, normally you wouldn't really expect anything out of the podcast, in terms of like, larger type of news, which, I would consider this to be one of the larger pieces of news. So it's good that they, did that there.
hmm And then at the publishing panel, the news we've kind of always been waiting for here, they finally properly, fully announced Legend of Korra, The Mystery of Penshan Island. So this is the first Korra one-shot comic, the Mako and Bolin one-shot. We have a date at last, so February 25th, 2025. That's also /26th, of course, for comic book stores. But finally, it's coming out. It's a little bit past what we maybe expected. We thought they might be able to kind of slot it in at the end of the year, but no, it's going to be the early 2025 book. It has been very heavily delayed behind the scenes when it comes to, I think, just the standard delays that we've been getting, but also art delays. So it's nice that it seems to finally be coming out. I hope they stick to the date and it doesn't get delayed anymore, because it really has been a long time kind of coming. It's been a giant gap between Korra comics that's been quite unfortunate, given that we don't have that many comics coming out full stop. But what are your thoughts on this? We finally have a date for the Mako comic.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that they finally got something that they're seems like they're going to, try to keep, more on sort of point here. And, with the images that we did get of it and stuff like that, I think that, it speaks to a little bit that they're on track, at least for the most part, bearing any other major type of delays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you said, they put out some preview pages for this. It's interesting because there was preview pages at New York Comic Con last year as well. So kind of combined, we have about like the first like 6-7-ish pages of the book overall. It's sort of unfortunate. It's just before the book seems to properly get going into the stuff we're really eager to see in it, but it's still interesting. We did also get the description, which we'll quickly kind of go over here, because now we have a proper sense for like, okay, the cover tells us, we have the cover for a while, it tells us some stuff, but the description says a little bit more. So it says here, Mako and Bolin set off towards Penshan Island in the Fire Nation to find answers to a case, and maybe a little bit of their past along the way. When a strange missing persons case falls into his lap, Mako is forced to choose between his job and doing what he feels is right. An upturned room and an unhelpful witness aren't promising starts to the investigation, but when his brother Bolin comes across a surprising clue that ties their own mother to the case, the pair embark on a journey to the small rustic island of Penshan. The island's inhabitants seem to have things to hide, and the brothers are determined to get to the bottom of it, even if it means uncovering uncomfortable parts of their family's past. So, the family picture in the cover is where all of our speculation was exactly on track. It does relate to their mother, Naoki, and just in general stuff about the family full stop. So what are your thoughts on this now that we have a little bit more of a sense clearly what the book is actually about?
I think this is, shaping up to be a lot more interesting than we maybe thought it was. I mean, it already seemed kind of interesting and mysterious and whatnot, that's in the title itself. But, I think getting, some history on the brothers, which is something that we've always wondered, we've seen a little bit, a tease of, their family. So we know that there's something there. It's cool that we're actually going to get, sort of fill in the gaps finally.
Yeah, so the obvious speculation, just to kind of get people up to speed on kind of where most people are at with this, is obviously their mother is the Fire Nation side of the family, which up to now we don't know really anything about. In Korra Book 3, we got the San, their father's side of the family in the Earth Kingdom in Ba Sing Se. But all we knew about Naoki is just that, okay, she's from the Fire Nation, and then sort of like San, but from a different perspective, she comes to Republic City. They kind of unite, they get married, and they have Mako and Bolin, and then are eventually killed. This seems to be suggesting maybe we delve into why they were killed. Is it in relation to what happened with Naoki? Because we know with San, there was a bit of an issue in the family when he left. They didn't want him to go, and there was a bit of a kind of family feud thing sort of going on, and there was only the picture is the one piece of contact that he ever sent back to his family. So the suggestion, and I think the heavy speculation, is that is there actually two copies of this picture, and that both of them at a certain point decided to send a copy of the picture of their family back to their own families from their home. And so what Bolin is going to come across, the surprising clue, is that he finds this picture, which should be, as far as they're aware, in Ba Sing Se, with their grandmother, but actually it turns up again, and we address sort of the idea that maybe Naoki also sent a letter back to her family like San did to his. Now, there's obviously a bit of a jumping ahead there on that, but there obviously has to be a reason the picture is in play here, given that otherwise, like I said, this picture should be in Ba Sing Se. But what are your thoughts on some of the stuff that they're going to delve into with the mother here, and the fact that there seems to be a bit of a mystery on the island, people hiding things, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think, islands and mystery are kind of like a hot thing, so I can see that kind of working out pretty well with the way that they, seem to be trying to angle in things with their family and their history and how, important this island is. So I think that, the fact that there's something that they're uncovering, with the other side of their family and, sort of even them themselves feel like they don't really have, the full picture of their own family. I don't know, that makes it really, interesting, curious to see where this goes with, and especially with Mako and his job and all the conflict that at least the description gives that's there. It looks like there's going to have to be some hard choices to make.
Yeah, so this should be pretty exciting. It's obviously going to be the start of Korra one-shot comics. We obviously don't know what's next, but this creative team, the art looks really good, so we're excited to see what they do after this. Otherwise, there wasn't really any other news in particular. We were, to a certain degree, I think, expecting them to maybe announce what the next Avatar comic is after the book we're going to review today, Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer. They didn't do that, so I'm guessing that's probably going to be their big New York Comic Con announcement. Otherwise, I don't know what they're doing. But probably the only other thing from the publishing panel to talk about is one almost like random line that they said was that right towards the end they said publishing is going to be ramping up soon for like Avatar, because obviously they didn't have a lot of new books to announce, but apparently things will be ramping up, whatever that means. Obviously that's probably the clearest with Dark Horse, where they have very few books, so they are going to have to put out books. But RPG, we're expecting like the Spirit World book at some point. What does potentially ramping up the novels mean, given that they seem to be continuing as they have been so far? Obviously, we get ever closer to Avatar Studios, and there's going to be, I'm guessing, a lot of tie-in stuff to that stuff when it starts to come out. But what way would you interpret the idea that publishing apparently is going to ramp up in the coming time?
Yeah, I mean, the coming time is, kind of vague in terms of what that really means. Just like, when the new Avatar Studio stuff is going to officially come out is still, kind of up in the air, even if we are sort of, I don't know, maybe trying to hope and expect for some news next year. Maybe, we'll even see on that, side of things. So I don't know. I mean, I hope it just means that they're actually sort of like getting the people in place and locking them down so that they can actually, keep things sort of on track going forward. Because I'm sure, like you're saying that, if this is tying with the Avatar Studio stuff, and like we've seen before, they usually try to do at least a couple tie-in things. Even when they had the original movie, they had tie-in things to go with it. So I wouldn't expect anything particularly less in this case here. It's just sort of how much and how much can they keep it sort of on track. But I think if they're really trying to push this big sort of tentpole thing, which is, probably going to be the backbone of Avatar Studios sort of staying there and going forward, they're going to have as much as they can sort of like ready to go. So, no, I would expect it to be a lot of sort of tie-ins and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some extra stuff, and I'm sure, we'll see some more merch come out, out of nowhere, and probably more along the lines of the official channels, maybe not as many sort of licensing stuff, but it's kind of hard to tell, this far out, which we don't even really know exactly how far out it is.
Yeah, because obviously, as far as we're right now, it's January 2026 for the first movie, and then there is a series kind of somewhere in the background, and you've probably heard bits and rumors that have happened recently about kind of stuff like that. So we're expecting at least early to mid 2026, assuming there's probably a little bit of adjustment and delays. They are going to have to start marketing this, especially by the time we get to like Comic-Con next year. The two Comic-Cons are going to have to be, you know, we're 6 months out, we're, you know, under 6 months out from actually potentially seeing this stuff, and then there's a lot of other stuff that we do expect like Paramount to do to start kind of promoting this stuff as well. It's just about how early they do it, but then if they are going big in on merchandise lines, and then that would have to include extra publishing stuff as well, like your young reader novel adaptations and stuff like that. You know, you have to have that stuff ready to go. So that's why I'm guessing there wasn't too much news here, is because they probably have some of that stuff that they're working on in the background to have it ready. It's just they don't know when they need it ready for, is probably the idea. But obviously, still a bit too early to speculate. I'm guessing New York Comic Con is also going to be still a bit too early, but they still have to keep some stuff coming out. So like next Avatar comic and all that sort of stuff. Otherwise, the podcast panel, we maybe had some hope, because they did kind of last minute add in Isabella Betcher into the panel, and she's a pretty high up person at Avatar Studios, and so there was a speculation about like, well, why is she there if there's like nothing to talk about here? And apparently she didn't really have anything to say necessarily, but did address sort of Avatar Studios in the sense that she said kind of like it's not time yet to announce anything, but we are working on stuff. So we got the standard kind of comment that they've been like and Brian have been saying, basically that, you know, stuff is happening, it's just not the time yet. So, you know, we're just waiting for when it actually is the time. But that's San Diego Comic-Con. Of course, New York Comic-Con's coming up in October, so we'll be expecting some news from that, and we'll get to that when we know more about it. Otherwise, on the other side of the kind of franchise, we have Netflix Avatar. Geeked Week is coming up on the week of September 16th, so we're like 2 weeks away from that. And Avatar has actually been quite heavy in the marketing. It's in like the thumbnail for the video. You see it pretty prominently placed. Even though by the time this event happens, they won't have properly started like filming, like proper production on the show just yet. So pretty much the only thing that we're probably expecting from this for Avatar is probably casting announcements for season 2, with the heavy expectation being that we're going to find out who they got to play Toph. But then you have other characters like Ursa, Long Feng. They announced a couple of other general characters who I think are new that we're expecting maybe some names for. And then the kind of interesting one that's been discussed is that there's apparently a character called Bonesaw also going to be in book 2, which I'm guessing is an Earth Rumble character, but we're going to have to wait and see on that. But yeah, what would you be expecting for Netflix Avatar during Geeked Week, given production won't have started yet?
Yeah, no, it seems kind of early for them to really be announcing too much, like you're saying. So, like, besides casting, I mean, unless they're, I don't know, going to give some sort of, sneak peek into, sort of the development or process or something like that. But I can't see them doing too much of that right now with it being so early on it. So I don't know. I mean, of course they're going to promote it as one of their, highlight shows as of now, and has all the popularity and hype behind it. So of course they're going to talk about it to some degree, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's going to be too much we're getting out of it.
Yeah, not really sure, because while I think it's going to be cool just to see the kind of hype go up again, it's also like, I don't get too excited by the casting announcements, just because inevitably I'm not going to be super familiar with a lot of the people who they do cast. And as we've discussed in a lot of the more recent podcasts, a lot of the show comes down to how they do the adaptation. Like, I'd say how many episodes they're going to have for book 2 is going to be probably more telling than I think the casting, which I mostly trust them to get right. I don't really have any obvious standout as like, they got the casting wrong. Even some of the kind of characters who maybe need to be a little bit better done is probably more of a writing thing than an acting thing. So that might be something. Maybe they might announce how many episodes we're getting. That would be interesting, especially if it's different than 8. that could be quite telling about what the plan is. But I'm guessing there'll be a little bit of that recap as well, because if I remember correctly, the whole we're getting book 2 and 3 was more of just a social media announcement. It wasn't during an event. So probably recapping that, hey, Avatar's getting a book 2 and 3 video format style thing. There'll probably be some maybe news attached to that. But that's where we're at. Plus, there's probably a lot of other casting as well for the book as well, where like we probably have like Guru Patik and all these other characters who we need to know about as well. But yeah, that's coming up in about 2 weeks, and we'll obviously cover it on the podcast after it happens. But otherwise, there's been other stuff happening. Like there's not really many releases left in the year. There's like Shadow of Kyoshi paperback in October. The first 3 one-shot comics for Avatar are getting collected into the library edition at the end of October. But otherwise, that's kind of it for the rest of the year. Like physical release for the RPG and like full availability. But otherwise, we are kind of mostly done here, except for whatever they announce at the upcoming conventions. So that is the news. So from there, we'll go into our main topic for the podcast, which is our big review discussion for the new Avatar comic, The Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer. So this came out not earlier this week, but earlier last week on Tuesday and Wednesday. This is, of course, written by Faith Erin Hicks, art by Peter Wortman, colors by Adele Matera, lettering by Richard Starkings, and comic crafts Jimmy Betancourt. So the usual kind of creative team here with, of course, special thanks to people at Avatar Studios. Mike and Brian are involved somewhere in here to a certain degree, which is interesting because there's no mention of Tim Hedrick anymore. It's back to special thanks to Mike and Brian again. So that seems to be the new thing under specifically Avatar Studios, that they're back to highlighting it that way again. But anyway, so what we're going to do here is we're going to do general thoughts, and then we'll do our usual kind of scene by scene, more in-depth discussion. So overall, Greg, what were your thoughts on the 5th Avatar one-shot comic about June and Iroh?
Yeah, I think this, I think it a little bit sort of surprised me. I think overall, I like the story. It's pretty straightforward. It gives you a good bit of, sort of figuring out of, sort of what happened after, the initial war here, and sort of, how some people have, reacted to, the world's changes, which I think that's a good thing to see some of the reactionary sort of events of, everything that happened. And, with it being such a long-standing 100-year war and everything, like you would think that it would be pretty sort of like impactful on the world. And, you can definitely see how that, comes about in this book, and how different characters are affected by it, for the positive and for the bad, and how people are just dealing with things. So I think it's a good one to sort of see that, because a lot of times you don't get to see sort of the aftermath of things. Like usually you get like a brief little thing about it, but you don't really get to see sort of, a little bit of the longer term. And this isn't really that long term. Like this is still within all of their, our main characters' lives and whatnot. But it's sort of the initial sort of aftermath. So I like that it had that sort of focus here, and as well as getting a little bit of Iroh's past and everything. It's not maybe the thing everyone sort of hopes for, getting sort of the bigger story of Iroh's past and everything like that. But I think realistically, that wasn't something you would really think would come out of this sort of one shot here. It would be, in a much different sort of format, or longer format, or something like that. But I think for what it is, it's pretty good. It was a nice, quick story to get through, and I'm glad they finally got it out and everything.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose more specifically, like, what were your thoughts on the kind of slight change in format here of going from the focus is entirely on one of the main characters to kind of instead here, like June is the focus, but kind of like heavily backed up by Iroh. So like the idea that they were never just going to do a June comic on her own without her interacting with one of the main cast, because it probably wouldn't have sold well from a marketing perspective. So they added in Iroh to kind of help June on her arc, but they also gave you a bit of Iroh because they an Iroh one shot, probably they weren't going to go full on into his backstory in the way we wanted to. So it kind of
Yeah.
solves both of the problems for both characters. How do you feel they did the main and minor character dynamic here?
Yeah, I mean, they're dynamic. We know that they've had a dynamic before, and it was interesting how they, went about that in this story specifically, as we'll get to later on. But yeah, I mean, I think, realistically, yeah, just having June as the character, despite her being one of the more, popular minor characters that we have in the show, and especially with her pet share shoe and everything, like she had a good, sense of popularity. So I think, even if it, she would have had a good, play regardless. But I think, with like you're saying, with having Iroh there, that definitely sort of elevates it a bit. That really, definitely helps it out a bit in the long run. So I think, for the most part, that was fine with me. Like, two characters working together, for this sort of story here, and with the way that they interacted, I think for the most part, I was okay with how they were going with that, and that seems like the best way to go about, having, even a popular sort of minor character sort of have their own sort of spotlight in a story.
Hmm. Yeah, like I liked it as well. There's obviously going to be some debate about which is the best one shot. I think it's probably between this, Suki, and Azula, but all for kind of like very different reasons because they're kind of different approaches overall. But I did like this one because we did get to do kind of full kind of big story stuff with June because we don't know her that well, so the story is quite important for her. And even though we only get like a slice of Iroh's backstory, it's still interesting and it covers and like relates to stuff that we've always wanted to know about Iroh. And their dynamic together, I think, works quite well with the kind of theme of the comic being sort of like, can you have this sort of like second life? Can you move on from like a darker period of your life and actually like kind of live peacefully after that? That's kind of what we're about here. And I thought they explored that well with, June, Iroh, and then also the new character Fawn, who we'll get into later on as well. So I in general, like for a one shot, I think it's pretty nicely done. Probably the only criticism I'd have of it is we'll get into it. It's just the sort of connection of the June backstory in with the present day story, and how at least to me it feels a little bit kind of random. But we will discuss that when we get to it. But I think the final point is just that like we're obviously so close to the release here, but it's also something I can't help but mention every time. It's just kind of feels crazy that in 2024 this is the only Avatar comic release that we have this year. We didn't get a free comic. There's no other Avatar comic this year. There's no Korra comic this year. It's just this. And I kind of thought that the whole point of like the one shots is that because they are more kind of like sandbox style things, was that we might be able to get them like a little bit more regularly, but they seem to be even less regular than they were when they were more official trilogies. And obviously, I get it, we're in a bit of a kind of like gap period, but I think most of the comics history has been in the gap period past Korra. So it's obviously it's I don't want to affect my like review of the book because of like the way the release schedule is, but it's hard to not notice like the fact that, the Abrams put out like a full Avatar novel where we get a huge exploration of the Roku era, and like this is all Dark Horse, the main publisher, have to put out. It's good, but as just the only book, it feels like they should be doing a bit more. But what are your thoughts on that? Just like how the output from Dark Horse has been, especially this.
Yeah, no, I definitely can understand that. And, many people, who are following the comics and stuff have, sort of seen the downturn of how, speedily or not speedily the publishing side of the comics has gone out. And everything takes time and takes effort, and there's a whole bunch of factors that go into making these books. But the general, like you're saying, the general idea was that these would be something that would be slightly more easier to produce. But it definitely feels that there's just a lot of moving pieces that, of course, we on the outside don't know, what's really happening and how this is going to affect things in sort of the grander scheme of things, which is, okay, we're not supposed to know everything, but it would help to have, like you've said before, have some sort of communication on that front for, those who are looking forward to this. So that is a bit of a downturn, but I think at least when we do get stuff, it is usually pretty good and it is up to the quality that we've seen for the most part throughout most of their comic publishing sort of history. So there is some good and some bad with it, and it's definitely hoping that once things sort of get wrong, that it'll be a bit more sort of regular here.
Yeah, yeah. The quality point is good because the we have like 72 pages of like really nice Peter Wortman art, and yeah, there is some good stuff going on here. We want a little bit more than this, and hopefully, publishing ramping up means what it means, and we'll be getting Avatar one shots, Korra one shots, and something else. Maybe a more mainline story that maybe is leading into Avatar Studios. We just don't know. But we'll get to going through the kind of book scene by scene here. So we open up in Ba Sing Se, obviously in the Jasmine Dragon here, and it's Iroh being the kind of owner, the host here. We also have his waitress Fang here, who we saw in like Matcha Makers before, and there's some fun references to that as we'll go through the book as well. And we just basically get the atmosphere setting idea here of the people of Ba Sing Se love the Jasmine Dragon and they really like Iroh as well. They, for the most part, don't really view him as being this kind of terrible person because he led the siege of Ba Sing Se when he was younger, that sort of thing. No, he is very respected. And so on like page 3 here, kind of when a protester arrives outside and is like, get this guy out of the city, like he's the Dragon of the West, he attacked the city. You think this is going to be Iroh's past thrown back in his face, the people are going to turn on him, but his patrons like defend him. They're like, no, this is the best tea in the city, the war is over, like they're telling the protester to move on. And you think what could become a big issue actually isn't an issue, and it kind of highlights that Iroh overall, for the most part, has managed to really make this kind of second life here as a as a tea shop owner into this thing where he has moved on from his past, though of course his past is always there, as we'll kind of address here, but it's not the big problem that you maybe think it's going to be. So what are your thoughts on these kind of opening few pages?
Yeah, no, I thought this was a really good way to sort of, like you're saying, set the stage for how Iroh is currently living. And, we've sort of seen this before, so we know that, for the most part, his love of tea has won over, most people's sort of, previous, conclusions about him. Obviously, as you can see, it's not all perfect, and, there's always going to be at least a few people that, don't agree with things, which is, just sort of how it is here. But, it definitely seems like, he's trying to move on. And, they have the two new characters here that are trying to sort of have him sort of talk about his past, the sort of immediate past here where he helped to sort of, make a positive change. So they, they definitely are trying to highlight that there, that, he's been doing some good for the world. Like, he helped, right the wrongs of, all of basically his family's history. So there's definitely, more positive, they're saying now than what he's had in his past, or at least that's what we're, trying to get to here in the front. But, there's outliers, and that's what we're sort of seeing here as well. But it was really cool to see sort of the patrons sort of really stand up for him here and sort of, somewhat somehow de-escalate the situation.
Mm-hmm. And from there, we cut to kind of closing time at the Jasmine Dragon. Feng tells Iroh that they're running low on all of their blends, and so the question comes up, what's happening with the deliveries from the merchants? And he's told that they are irregular, and other tea shops are having the same problem. And so this is the idea of, oh yeah, well, what's happening to the tea? Is this just an accident, or is it purposeful? As we'll kind of see, it's kind of a purposeful thing because it relates to why Iroh is being targeted, which is what happens here. So Fang leaves to go home, and once she's gone, June jumps in to attack Iroh. Pretty cool stuff here. He blocks her kind of throwing kind of needle here with a pretty nice fire attack. and she reveals herself and is like, okay, I'm going to collect my bounty here. He's happy to see her again, but she's like, hey, you shouldn't be happy to see me again. There's a pretty nice little action sequence here where like she takes out her whip and she goes to attack him. He grabs it, he kind of pulls her in close, but she uses this to kind of blast some Shirshu venom in his face, and so Iroh's out here and captured by June within the first kind of few pages of the book here. So obviously the idea here is, okay, who's hired June to get a bounty on Iroh? That's the major question here. So I think pretty good stuff here, setting up that there's this other detail in the book, which is tea deliveries not working out, like where the tea supply is going to be, and then the other point of why is Iroh being targeted. They're the two big things for the book. But what are your thoughts on the tea mystery and then the arrival of June in?
Yeah, no, I think it's great that they just get into it right here in the beginning, and we can see that this is going to have some implications, especially with him and his tea shop and everything. So I like that sort of aspect, that there's some sort of undertone to things that maybe not are going perfectly well for the shop. No, even though it seems to be booming in terms of customers and stuff like that. And yeah, no, I mean, seeing June is always cool here. And we always get to see her sort of being pretty sort of like efficient in her moves here. So I really like that they're sort of using her skill set to sort of like the most effective way here, and just using her skills that she's had to take down someone who otherwise would be a really hard person to sort of take down in any other sort of fashion here, especially if they get going here. But you could say maybe Iroh's not trying to go all out or anything crazy like that, but it still works out. She's still able to capture him pretty efficiently.
Yeah, like if this wasn't June, I get the impression like whoever was trying to go after him probably wouldn't have been able to get the advantage over him, which is why the second he sees her face, he turns off the firebending basically. So that's a kind of telling little detail there. But yeah, she has him captured. He eventually wakes up from the Shirshu venom, and he's like, "Hey, if we're going to be traveling together, can you tell me who placed the bounty on me or where we're going?" And she says, "No, I'm not answering any questions." And then we get sort of a kind of a bit of classic kind of funny Iroh of just annoying the people around him. I think we saw this with the Earthbenders, of just like he really puts on a bit of a show here. He starts singing this song about a water tribe girl, and June does not like this at all, and it seems like Nyla doesn't either. So June is forced to be like, okay, I'll answer a question if you stop singing. And so he decides that the question he wants asked is, where are we going? And so she says that they're going to Doxia Harbor, which is a former Fire Nation colony in the Huzin province, and it's also one of the last places a bounty hunter can make a decent living. Iroh knows of this place. He says it has an unsavory reputation for black market dealings, but it's also where you can find some of the rarest tea leaves in the world. And he asks who placed the bounty. She said she'd only answer one question, and he ponders that, oh, maybe someone in my past has caught up with me. Perhaps I thought it might. So he's aware that there's probably something he needs to face, and it's kind of reminiscent of like the whole Rough Rhino situation there, where like there was a past with them, which was more of a minor thing, but it's obviously a bit of a bigger deal here. Well, we'll get to the next page in just a second, but what are your thoughts on these first few pages of proper interaction between June and Iroh here? The reveal of where they're going.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like your line of saying this classic Iroh singing, because that's exactly what I wrote down in my notes here, because it definitely feels sort of like on point for something he would do in order to get sort of the information he wants without resorting to any sort of violence, which in this case, with him actually knowing the person who's abducting him, he's maybe a bit more lax on the situation here. But we've seen him before, even in other more sort of trying stressful situations, sort of acting the same sort of way, just maybe a bit more sort of cautious or wary of the situation. But no, I think it's it's interesting to hear that some things have changed. There's different promises, and some of them are sort of different than what they used to be, and the way that she's going here is like sort of the only way that, she's currently able to sort of do things, which is interesting to note. We're sort of starting to learn about sort of the changes in the world that, Fire Lord, Zuko and everybody else has sort of started to affect the world. So we're sort of getting to see this here, and maybe Iroh sort of being sort of in the Earth Kingdom here isn't as sort of aware of some of these other sort of changes. So it's interesting to see him sort of, I guess, sort of react to these as well as sort of factoring up toward his past is coming into play here.
Hmm. And yeah, I like the details with Doxia Harbor as well. Like another Fire Nation colony finally mentioned to us, and the fact that they link that into Who's In, which we've heard about before. Because I think during Azulon's funeral, they mentioned that like one of his big successes in his life was his like victories in the Who's In province. So I suppose
Yeah.
highlighting where those colonies came from. That's always kind of good information to have. It also gives you a sense for like they don't specifically say kind of where on the map it is, but obviously like it's a harbor. But then also it being a colony places it in or around like west coast of the Earth Kingdom, nearish to the Fire Nation, and it highlights okay. So from Boston, say they've gone here, and it gives you a sense for the direction as well. But yeah, it also is a little bit of an insight into the Aang era from a kind of slightly different perspective than we've seen. We've got a lot of the Korra set up from like imbalance and stuff like that, the world coming together. But here's this other side of things, which is that, yeah, a lot of the underworld style stuff, you almost say like the leftovers from like the Kyoshi era with like bandits and stuff like that. That stuff is starting to fade out of the world a little bit, and so bounty hunting's also going away as the world is in a bit of a better position. And so the question is like, what's going on with this? That's an interesting one also. But then we get into an interesting one. There's a lot of, I suppose, speculation in the build up to this book of like, okay, why was this the pairing of characters that they did for this comic, given that it's probably one of the weirdest dynamics that we got in like all of ATLA. That very much felt like, oh yeah, this is a early 2000s kind of little bit of a plot point in this random episode, Bottle of the Water Tribe, and they choose to address it here rather than just kind of ignore it. So Iroh says to June, June, when my nephew first hired you to hunt the Avatar, I did not treat you with the respect you deserved. I'm sorry for how I acted towards you. You owe me nothing, but I hope you will accept my apology. And June just says, I'll think about it. And we sort of move on from it after this point with the kind of use in the story being one to sort of address one of the few kind of maybe like parts of Avatar where it maybe hasn't aged so well, this specific dynamic. And then also I think just for June and Iroh, like for her to see that, oh, her prisoner is actually very kind of like respectful, and she can actually just have a conversation with him about this thing. She doesn't have to be so on guard around Iroh because, hey, he helps people, he's nice. Setting up the start of that dynamic, which will eventually become a friendship over the course of the book. So I think it was probably the right thing to do is to address this, because this is part of why these two characters are paired together, is because they have some history together, even if it's not like anything super substantial. But what are your thoughts on this? The fact that they chose to address the slight controversy from Bottle of the Water.
Yeah, no, I think it's good that they addressed it because that definitely does get highlighted when everybody talks about, sort of these two characters interacting, and, especially with Iroh and his character, overall being, one of the more sort of favored characters. Not that he doesn't have, anything in his past that has, issues, as we'll see later on in this comic. But, in terms of how his more mature character self acts, that definitely, comes out as like a highlighter in terms of, being something that doesn't really feel quite in place with what we know of him. So no, I'm glad that they sort of address it here. And, considering this book is all about, people sort of having, second chances and changing the way that they sort of act in the past, it feels on point for that. I think, some people will be cool with it. Some people will still think it still seems odd or anything like that. But, I think it's good that they at least, chose to address it in some regard.
Mm-hmm. And then immediately Nyla senses something at this point, and they are ambushed by other bounty hunters who June reveals are former colleagues, so former bounty hunters. They used to be the Viper Bats, but they now do this new thing where basically they turn in or sort of quote unquote bounty hunt other bounty hunters and turn them into the Earth Kingdom, and that's how they kind of make their money these days. So this is, I guess, part of the Earth Kingdom tactics to kind of get rid of bounty hunting in this new era is to turn bounty hunters against each other. And June, in particular, does not like this at all. She would never consider doing this and thinks that they are like traitors for kind of going against their own kind, basically. They argue that, we've got to make a living, basically. But she's like, no, you rat out your friends. Like, I can't agree with that. I'd never join up with the likes of you, effectively. And Iroh seems to be able to see that June is kind of on the right side of this overall, and so the fight is basically about to begin. But June is apparently going to handle this group on her own, so it's like, what, 4-on-1, I think it is. But we'll get to the fight in just a second here. So, what are your thoughts on this? This kind of new thing that this is where I guess a lot of the bounty hunters have gone down, is just this rush to kind of turn each other into the authorities to make money, but that also isn't necessarily something that's going to last forever. You're eventually going to run out of bounty hunters.
Yeah, no, it definitely will run out of them eventually. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, depending on sort of like, the bounty hunters and how they're doing things, some of them definitely seem, very sort of cutthroat, as we'll see when we meet one of the other ones later on. But I don't know. It feels like that's something that, it seems like it could work maybe, but some bounty hunters, already sort of work with, sort of, or they could have worked with sort of like, law enforcement and the government had them, had they been a little bit more sort of organized, which of course we know the Earth Kingdom hasn't always been the most sort of organized of places in certain times. So, that could be sort of hit or miss here. But yeah, it definitely feels like sort of turning everyone on their self is sort of, a short term, sort of way of resolving a situation. And I don't know, you would think that, maybe they could come up with sort of a better solution here, or maybe this group here is just sort of trying to take advantage of the situation, which is sort of what June is sort of coming to here.
Mm-hmm. And it also is sort of playing a little bit into the kind of like the Dao Fei sort of dynamic, where they're kind of presenting June and then later like Fan and the others as being a bit more kind of noble bounty hunters to a certain degree, of like they at least have a code to them, versus a lot of the people who have gone about turning in other bounty hunters are more of your kind of classic just thugs, just kind of looking for this kind of underworld way of life. Which I think is an interesting kind of dynamic. We'll get into it with sort of like June's backstory with her father, of like this is where at least her code comes from. But it to me feels like it's clearly referencing that idea of like not all bandits in Avatar are just like thugs effectively. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's any validity, I suppose, to the Dao Fei comparison a little bit here?
I definitely get your point of view there, saying that there's like, some are, slightly more, I guess you could say like reputable, type of underworld sort of characters and their dealings, and there's some sort of like organization to them, versus other ones are sort of like you're saying, sort of like, just sort of hired hands for, the mission or whatever sort of going on at the time. And I think, the characters that we see, that are a little bit more sort of favorable, like June and some others, they definitely feel like they have that sort of, upper quality towards them. Maybe it's just because we've been around them a little bit more, and, these new characters are just sort of designed to be that sort of way. But it definitely has some sort of idea of that comparison there. But I don't know, even some of the other characters that we do meet that are, a little bit maybe more reputable, they still seem sort of cutthroat, or at least, that's sort of the news about them is pretty cutthroat. Maybe they're not sort of as bad, and some of those are just sort of, stories to inspire some sort of fear in them and stuff like that, which, that happens all the time, and sometimes that's just sort of the better way to go about things. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing, and especially in the Earth Kingdom, like it makes sense that there would be those sort of comparison, considering their history with the Dao Fei and everything.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the fight begins. It is June versus four Viper Bats here. Again, she's using her whip and her kind of non-bender fighting skills, and she's doing pretty well. But eventually, like one of them kind of like bumps into her, like hits her in the back. She counters. She continues to go on, but she's a little bit more defensive. Someone grabs her. She kind of headbutts him. It looks like she's about to get a little bit overwhelmed. She's not like captured just yet. She hasn't like lost, but Iroh decides that we probably need to step in a little bit, and he talks to Nyla and is just like, hey, you're going to help me out here. So Nyla bumps one of them out of the way, and then Iroh does a really cool firebending move, the kind of full power breath of fire, sends them running away, realizing that like, ooh, if he gets going at all, we have no chance here, basically. So it is one of Iroh's few times actually fighting in the book, but it's probably the most impressive one here, because we know the breath of fire technique is particularly kind of notable and rare. He is the Dragon of the West after all, and it's a really cool panel as he uses it here. But yeah, they run off. She notes that they are cowards, and at this point she basically is just like, hey, are you going to be like a nice prisoner and kind of play along here? Like, do I need to keep you handcuffed? And he's like, okay, yeah, I want to find out what's going on here anyway. So, like, even if you kind of let me go at this point, I'm probably still going to go with you. So Iroh's like a willing kind of follower, prisoner at this point. But what are your thoughts on the action sequence?
Yeah, no, I thought this was, it's a good, little bit here just to show sort of June's prowess and, how well she does in this situation here, which I think, given a little bit more time, she probably could have come out on top even, maybe without Iroh's help. I think if Nyla was, sort of holding on to Iroh, this probably would have been a lot clearer, easier. But, that's a little bit of a handicap here that she has. But no, it was a nice sort of add in to have Iroh come in here and use one of his sort of classic techniques here that, sort of is pretty overwhelming here. And, he doesn't really sort of like attack anyone directly. He's just sort of, making fire to just sort of scare them away, which, pretty much works pretty instantly here. It just feels, seems pretty overwhelming here. So I like that they, used the technique here and, it worked well in this situation.
Yeah, it's a cool one because it's also just like, it's such a display of power that like he's not doing any firebending out of his hands or legs. It's out of his mouth, and we know that those are the things that highlight, okay, this is someone extremely skilled if they can, earthbend with their chin or like firebend with their mouth. It's it just shows the skill level. But we continue on, and so June is like, okay, I can trust you now. I don't know specifically who hired me in terms of a name, but it was the leader of the Wu Yi tea cartel, which operates out of Doxia Harbor. So she reveals, yeah, they control most of the tea trade throughout the Earth Kingdom and probably beyond. And basically, yeah, all of the tea supplies, including for your shop, probably goes through them ultimately. And so Iroh's like, okay, so I guess if I go with you, I can figure out who's after me, but also sort out the tea supply situation as well. She unlocks the kind of shackles on Iroh at this point, because they're basically just going to go together to figure this out. She's going to get her bounty because Iroh's just going to walk in, and it's going to be more comfortable, relaxing this way. That's nice. I think that is classic Iroh, that he actually convinces the bounty hunter to just free him, and he'll go along with her. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this? To one of the bit page kind of just convincing scene here of just basically June realizing, I actually don't need to keep the cuffs on this guy.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, if he really wanted to get out, like, he probably could have figured out a way to get out of the cuffs. So, like, they're metal, they're not, what we see later on that actually works more effective with firebenders and holding them together. So, I think this is, it's a nice bit here, and, it definitely shows sort of, the conversational skills that Iroh has, that we always know him for, and how he's able to sort of, most of the time, de-escalate situations that he's in himself, unless, the people have, such a really strong animosity against him. So, I think this works well, and, definitely puts both the characters on a better footing here, which, opens them up to later conversations that, go even more places.
Mm-hmm. So they then get to talking, and Iroh asks about basically like, is it really that difficult these days to be a bounty hunter? And she's like, yes, the work has almost completely dried up. During the war, there was a lot of opportunities. Now, peace isn't so good for business. Iroh notes that Earth King Kuei has established reforms in the Earth Kingdoms, and he notes that, that I can see how that can affect your line of work. His new laws have put pressure on the people who used to hire me, and I've lost most of my clients. And she just notes here the world is a lot more civilized now and a lot less fun. So that's kind of the June that we know right now before she has her development, is that she considers bounty hunting to be fun, and she kind of thinks that maybe the world going in a more civilized direction isn't the best. But this is going to be one of the things that she kind of turns around on over the course of the book, is that maybe more civilized is actually better overall in terms of a path to the future for her especially. But she just notes that, she is never going to sell out fellow bounty hunters to the Earth Kingdom military, even if they kind of deserve it, basically. It's her principle, basically. Iroh asks her, would you consider retirement? And she just notes that, no, staying in some town, seeing the same people every day, that isn't me. I grew up hunting bounties with my father, traveling the world. And Iroh just notes that, what an exciting childhood you must have had. And we go into the flashback at this point, which we'll cover in a second here. But what are your thoughts on this? June finally addressing kind of more specifically the state of bounty hunting in the Aang era.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, if they're sort of trying to make the world a better place here, and they're trying to sort of, crack down on criminals in general, that, there might be less of them out there for, enterprising people to sort of hunt on their own and sort of, make money off of that. And, since she doesn't seem to want to work with, the military directly, especially since it seems like they're targeting their own sort of bounty hunters, which, depending on, how they were doing the bounty hunting, might have been for good or for bad, as we sort of see later on with another character, our new character. But, she has her sort of morals, her ideas, her way of doing things, and it definitely feels like that's not something that she wants to do. And it also feels like she's just in it for sort of the action and the excitement. And, when we get to the end of the book, we can see that, she still finds a way to have that. But, currently, at least, this is bounty hunting is the only thing that, she thinks that she's able to do that will give her that sort of thrill and that sort of excitement here. So it's something that she has to come to terms with, as well as, just the world changing in general.
Yeah. The traveling around the world part seems to appeal to her, and she feels this is the only way to make that happen. But as we'll see, there is another path. But the backstory here. So we get 4 pages of like visual backstory, and then like 1 page of June explaining some kind of bits afterwards. So we cut into the flashback, and it's a it's a young June talking to her mother and her father, and she wants them to retell her the story. It's her favorite story, which is basically how her mother and father met. And so they just describe that once upon a time there was a beautiful thief who thought it was great fun to steal from rich Earth Kingdom nobles and give to the poor. Her father says, "Ah yes, I remember her, a wily adversary. Earth Kingdom nobles had grown fat with ill-gotten wealth. The thief just wanted to make things a little more equal, and to take a little for herself. Just a little for myself. Thieving is hard work after all." But the Earth Kingdom nobles weren't happy with the thief, so they sent an elite force of soldiers after her. The soldiers set a trap for the beautiful thief, one she couldn't resist. And so the thief, who laughed in the face of the corrupt Earth Kingdom authority, was caught. The thief thought her life was over. Little did she know it was just beginning. One person recognized the injustice the beautiful thief fought against and decided he could not stand for it. Neither of them expected to fall in love. A thief and a soldier, who could imagine such nonsense? But it happened. And we're back in the kind of June talking to her parents. Such a silly old story, but it's her favorite. But at this point, they're basically ambushed. The soldiers have come for them again. And this time it's noted that they're after both of them, because the mother is still a thief, And the father is now basically a deserter, like he betrayed the army basically. And so her mother is going to make the sacrifice here. The father is going to get away with June, and the idea being that she'll be punished for being a thief, but it would be worse if they got a deserter, effectively. So this is why June, as she said, ends up traveling the world bounty hunting with her father, is because they have to escape and kind of basically stay on the run from the Earth Kingdom authorities, with the idea being that her mother being captured, I suppose, got them off their tail a little bit. And this is where we come out of the flashback, and we'll go into what she says in just a second. But what are your thoughts on the June backstory that we get? Given that, apart from the page that we're going to go on to next, we don't get like any more of this over the course of the rest of the book. So what did you make of this as the only backstory?
No, I mean, I think it works for, what they're trying to show here with her character and sort of why she sort of has, sort of the lifestyle that she's had, and, her upbringing, and, it being a bit more, I guess, unique, and why she sort of has the mentality that she has here, and, why she's also sort of, wary of a lot of different things as well. So, I think it works. It's short, it's to the point, it's not anything too crazy or too original or anything like that. But, I think in terms of what they're trying to show here, especially considering, they're not going too in depth with her character or anything like that, it works well enough.
Like, I like it, but I think it's very brief. And then there's other parts of her backstory that it feels like we almost should be getting, and as we'll go through it, it does feel like I'm almost like expecting for them to refer back to this, because usually when you do backstory in a book, like it's here for a very kind of thematic reason, and like we'll refer back to like the takeaways for June after this. But because they don't actually like show a flashback of her kind of like with her father, like learning from him, it doesn't ever feel like we quite get that. Like to me, like the takeaway is obviously that her mother is obviously kind of like Dao Fei-esque, because she's kind of like Robin Hood type thing, steal from the rich, give to the poor. And then her father kind of does something similar, where as a soldier, he sees that they've kind of focused on someone who is not the worst criminal in the world to an excessive degree, and thinks she doesn't deserve to be imprisoned. And so, her parents are on the run for not being the worst people out there. And so she and her father have to do what they have to do to survive. But I don't think the book is maybe the most clear on what exactly the sort of thematic connection we're trying to make here is. Like, it's an effective backstory in that it explains why she ends up sort of traveling on her own, and why she's never really had a home and doesn't consider it a place to settle down. But the ultimate takeaway from the end of the book is that she doesn't want that at all. Like, it's not that she needs to find a place to settle down. It's that, no, traveling, adventuring is kind of what she knows is what she wants, and we're going to kind of settle on that. So I would definitely say I was waiting for them to go back into like the follow-up to this, because they don't cover what happened to her mother. They don't explain what happened to her father. They don't explain Nyla's origins. And it feels like, well, if you're not going to do it here, where are you going to do it? And I just feel they maybe could have been a little bit more effective with this backstory at just portraying June backstory for like one of the only times we are probably going to be able to get June backstory. So like, again, it's just like, I like it, but I definitely have some questions about like if this is the most effective thing in the world for June overall. It's just conflicting thoughts on this. The following page gives us a little bit more, where she says, my father had principles. We swore to never do a job for any government authority, Earth Kingdom, Fire Nation, or the Water Tribes. We owed allegiance to no one. It's how I like it. Ira points out that, so there's no place you called home, and she says that home is just another word for being stuck in one place. Iroh notes the kind of positives sometimes for having home, having setting down roots in a specific spot. But she just says that Nyla's her family. He's all that she needs. And we kind of move on from the backstory kind of in full at this point. Um, this is where I do think I almost wish that this last page was still in the flashback and you had shown like June as a young bounty hunter, like show her with her father as a bounty hunter and them kind of like doing something, rather than this being the tell part of the backstory. But what are your thoughts on these kind of, I suppose, 5 pages, the overall June backstory here, and what it could have been, what it is, what the connection is to the present day story?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets across the idea of her not wanting to stay in one place just because she's had a life that has always sort of been on the move. So I think that part, comes kind of clear there. I think, there definitely is more to her story, like you're saying, with her father and her mother there, that, would be cool to find out. And yeah, like you're saying, like, whenever else are we ever gonna have a chance with a June, sort of story that'll get in depth in any sort of regard there. So it definitely can get the idea if you're really sort of invested in her character and sort of where she's coming from. When else would you ever get that sort of information, right? This would be the one place to get it. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe she doesn't know what happened to her mom or anything like that. I mean, it would be cool if like she somehow had to come in contact with the Earth Kingdom and then she actually learned what happened or something like that. But we don't know that, and doesn't seem likely that we're going to get that anytime soon here. But I think it's interesting to see them sort of converse about this and sort of see Iroh's other side of the coin in this sort of situation here. And I think it at least it gives you some idea of her basis for always wanting to be on the move, just because she has sort of this upbringing of that danger is always sort of around the corner and people are always sort of after her. And it would be interesting if that element of her past came into play. I think that would be a good lead in to sort of get more information about her if they ever chose to go that sort of route. Just sort of like how this story is about Iroh and his past coming up to him. So it is a bit sort of a missed opportunity that we couldn't go back in the past with both of their characters a little bit more. But I guess that's sort of where we're standing here at this storm.
Yeah, like the other obvious connection with what she says afterwards about their principles is obviously like the whole idea she doesn't trust or like the authorities because in her mind like they targeted her family for not even being the worst criminals out there necessarily, and so this is why she doesn't kind of ever do official work for governments, and that like again leading into the Dao Fei thing, she's clearly not like an abider basically, which is another fun kind of connection there. And it's interesting because again, prior to this book, like we did have some of this information about June. The old Nickelodeon website bio mentions that like her father was a bounty hunter, and that's where she learned to be a bounty hunter. So the stuff with the mother is like entirely new. Like we never had any mention to June's mother before, but the backstory on the website also mentions that her father is the one who gives Nyla to her when she's quite young, and that I think on the Nyla page on the old website it's mentioned that they've been together for 17 years. So it's one of the few ways you can kind of figure out that like what age is June meant to be, because that's always a kind of like a tricky thing as well, because they never just like tell us how old she is. But my interpretation is that she's kind of meant to be like mid to late 20s, I guess. But what is your take on that actually? Like how old do you view June as being?
Yeah, no, that's the quick math that I was just trying to figure out in my head based off of her, how perceived age, because we're going to assume that, in this backstory, she doesn't have Nyla, right? Because this is when her mother was around. So, after this is, once they're on the run and everything, and, we'll say that Nyla was given as sort of like, a protector, a companion for June, especially when she's younger and stuff like that. She would be sort of, around that sort of age, late 20s, early 30s, somewhere around there, especially since she seems like a more mature and level-headed character compared to a lot of our other sort of younger characters.
Mhm.
So no, that feels like that would sort of fit in place. And of course, this is a couple years after we've initially met her, so of course she's a bit older than what we saw her in the beginning time in the show. So
Mhm.
there's that to factor in as well.
Yeah, yeah, and that's confusing by itself. The comic timeline is a bit messy as well because it's like
Yeah.
there's a year at the right at the start of the promise, and then um like you already assume roughly a year has passed just in the show, full stop. So we're like 2 years anyway, and then I think most people assume that we're like approaching that third year in or around kind of where we are right now. So it's probably just under 3 years post series, but it's a bit of a messy one to kind of figure out because they don't tell us. But anyway, that's just that side thing on how old June is. So yeah, from there we get a bit of a traveling montage here because of course we have to get from Ba Sing Se to Doxia Harbor. So we do have to kind of travel from more East Earth Kingdom to West Earth Kingdom. So there's quite a bit of traveling to happen here. So we highlight some kind of peaks here, which going through some kind of some swamp, kind of swampy kind of areas with jungle. They camp out a little bit. We see Iroh's asleep at one point, and then they arrive at Doxia Harbor, and we get the look at the place here. It of course is a harbor. We see there's like a wall. It's a pretty big city, and then the entrance, at least on the kind of land side of things, has this kind of cool stone monument that seems to have like a watch kind of tower kind of building on top of it, which is kind of unique. I'd like to kind of know more about what the specifics are here.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you make of the look of Doxia Harbor, given that it's the new location for this?
Yeah, no, I like the look of it. I think, as they're saying it's a harbor town, it definitely feels like it has that sort of focus with the water and the land and sort of how people get in there, so the ports and the ships and stuff like that. So I think it definitely, sort of feels like it. And, it being a port town, it's definitely sort of, one of the bigger ones or one of the towns that's doing pretty well because it has that sort of trade and that income of, people and travelers and stuff like that. So it definitely feels like it's a cool one, unique center. Even just that house on top of the monument feels like something that's sort of like stand out. Like I really do wonder how people get up there and stuff like that, or if it's just all bending. But yeah, no, it seems cool.
Yeah. Earthbenders are gonna get up there, I suppose, relatively easily. But at the same time, if you have to use earthbending to like get up there, you worry about the stability a little bit. But I'm sure they know what they're doing. And but yeah, the main thing when Iroh arrives here is that he notes that okay, things are more civilized now, but elements from the 100 Year War era kind of like still seem alive and well in Doxia in terms of like it being more of like one of the final kind of places that has a black market. There's a little bit more kind of underworld kind of tones to it. Um, June notes that everyone here is an honest, hardworking criminal, but there's still relatively little use for bounty hunters, and especially one like June, who effectively, I think again from the Nick bio, I think she basically has like the highest rates of any bounty hunter in the world as far as we're aware. Yeah, they're just walking around. She notes the tea trade is controlled by the Wu Yi cartel. Lots of people around here have their own blends, and when he hears this, he sprints off. He just disappears from the frame and is immediately checking out all the different teas. And he talks about golden oolong, dahong pao, silver needle, and June has to kind of calm him down when we get the introduction of a new character in just a second here. But just before we get to her, what are your thoughts on the arrival here at Doxia Harbor and tea-loving Iroh back in action?
Yeah, no, I mean this is pretty classic, Iroh being distracted by something that he sees in person. We've seen him do this before with Zuko and even just on his own as a character. So I think this is pretty cool and showing, a little bit of the town and sort of explaining how it works here, how, are sort of honest working criminals, which, seems kind of a odd statement to say here, but that's sort of the point that June's trying to make in terms of this being the only place where that sort of idea and mentality can sort of survive.
And then they are interrupted by June noticing that her bounty hunter friend Fawn is here, and she's like, "Hey, I work here. This is where I sell my farm's goods. We've got tea, vegetables, warm knitted clothing, you name it." And June is really surprised to hear that her former bounty hunter friend now runs a farm, and she's kind of talking about like, "Hey, what happened to the your crew? Where are they?" And yeah, we get the introduction here of like Fawn and her bounty hunting crew are now all farmers. So we get the introduction here. So there's Cat Owl Claws Kinmei. He's now catching all the vermin who dare invade his vegetable patch. There's a shifty Shu Hui, who used to be a whiz with her hook swords, but now uses them to harvest grapes from the vines. And last but not least, Wicked Wei, who raises our prize-winning llama pacas. Their wool is warm and flame resistant. And June's reaction is just like, congrats, I guess. That's cool. But this is the initial introduction of these four characters here. Now, ultimately, Fawn is the only, I suppose, proper characterized character. The others are just, and her group, basically. But at least we get names for them here. What are your thoughts on these new former bounty hunters here?
No, this feels like a classic Avatar introduction of characters and ones that have, specific skills, and now they're using them for, another sort of way, but it's still sort of, based off of what they were already sort of good at before. So no, I think this was a nice way to introduce these characters and sort of characters that have sort of changed their ways, over the course of this time.
Mm-hmm. And Fawn sees that like she is shocked by this. You're wondering like, how did this even happen? Like, we used to be the toughest bounty hunters, but now we're farmers. And Fawn just notes that, yeah, it's been an adjustment, but we got the hang of things. She gives her a gift, a Lamapaka wool scarf, which is an important detail. Like, this will be used later on, and some other stuff. And this is all from the farm. And she even notes that Iroh is handsome and that he has a nose for fine teas, basically. June says that she has to go, but Fawn, just before she goes, is like, "Hey, come by and like see us at the actual farm when you're done with whatever business you have. I'm really proud of it," basically. But just before they can properly say goodbye, it's noted that they see the Wu Yi cartel in the background, that even though it's like a city of criminals, basically, the cartel does still throw their weight around. They want like protection money and stuff like this. Most of the people don't like the cartel because they're too heavy-handed, basically. And yeah, the idea is not everyone is a hard-working, honest criminal, basically. And so yeah, they leave with the idea that, Fawn is like, no, the offer still stands, like, come to see the farm. I'll never forgive you if you don't come, basically. And so June is kind of like forced to agree to this by the end. But yeah, this is just one of the key kind of ideas of the book, of like one of the first people who's properly just described this to her, like, hey, I have changed my way of life because the era has changed, basically. I've adjusted to it, and I'm not this anymore, but I am this, and it seems crazy, but I'm actually really proud of what I'm doing right now. Like you can change, you can have this like second chance. You're not just locked into being a bounty hunter for the rest of your life. And then once again, the idea of like the contrast between criminals versus the Dao style criminals versus the really just kind of thugs criminals as well is a cool dynamic. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Fawn's kind of explanation here of her change of life?
Yeah, no, I thought that was good. I think it's a good way to show, June that, things can change. Life is always sort of changing here, and, characters that were, maybe as regarded as she currently is, can, sort of change their way and stuff like that. So I like that there's this little bit here, and it's sort of, it's the first thing that's really sort of opening June's eyes to the way that things can be in sort of a better light, and that, even in this sort of town of hardworking people, there are sort of other elements that, sort of come at odds with people trying to make a betterment for themselves here. But, we're trying to show that, there are some bad characters and then there are some really, really bad characters here. At least that's what they're trying to get us at.
hmm And then Iroh notes that like he has also seen the change in this person meeting Fan, and it reminds him of himself. He notes that when I was young and a general in the Fire Nation military, I wanted glory and honor for my country, and I would do anything to get it. But now I see the value in my life as the owner of a humble tea shop. I see how my work brings joy to my customers and how I gain community by being part of Bossing Say. I've even been seeing a beautiful lady, something I never thought would be possible. There are good things that can come out of being rooted to one place. And he's thinking about, this is Lee May, who we met in Matcha Makers as well, that comic. So that's just interesting kind of continuity there, that there's a super like direct, like if you haven't read that comic, you don't know what this character's name is, but obviously you know if you've read everything. So that's fun stuff there. It also kind of places it in the timeline where like, okay, that comic has obviously taken place before this comic, which is nice to know, because otherwise you don't get too much of a sense for like specifically in the timeline where this comic is set compared to like the main trilogies. But this gives you at least some sense of it, because like he only had the waitress Fang at a certain point in the comics. Also Li Mei here. But yeah, Iroh kind of joins in with this comparison of like, once again, June hearing that someone had a very different life, where it's maybe viewed negatively nowadays, but has changed and evolved to, in the modern days, to something very different, and they're doing well. What are your thoughts on Iroh presenting this point to?
Yeah, it's just another way of showing that things can be changed, that, life doesn't always have to be what you sort of thought it would be. And, yeah, Iroh has sort of like he has the hindsight of a lot of years, right? So, June is a bit sort of younger, so she, can't quite see, as much of that change. She's sort of in the thick of it right now here. But, I definitely like sort of Iroh's idea here of, sort of having some roots, how that can sort of, change your way, and what you can see to bring you happiness can be different from what you thought it might once be.
hmm Then we arrive at the Wu Yi cartel headquarters, and as we head in here, we finally get to meet the person who hired June to capture Iroh here. And so Iroh recognizes him immediately. This is Kyung. Again, I'm not sure what the pronunciation on this one is meant to be, but Kyung. And he's like, oh, you remember me. I'm honored General Iroh. And Iroh's like, I thought you were dead, basically. And so, yeah, this is one of the soldiers who was under Iroh's command from back in the days of the Fire Nation army, of course. And again, it is Iroh's past being brought up directly in front of him. You can maybe already begin to make the connections here of like, effectively a survivor of the siege of Ba Sing Se. He's targeting Iroh for what reason necessarily? And you start to immediately see what the idea with this character is when he says this of like, oh, your new life is in Ba Sing Se as a owner of a tea shop. Do your customers truly know who you are, General Iroh? Do you know who smiles at them while he serves their tea? And Iroh notes that he doesn't try to hide his past, but I've done my best to live an honorable existence after the end of the 100-Year War. And he just says, how nice for you. Walk with me, like I'll show you some stuff. So an interesting introduction where you can see that this guy is rather dismissive of like Iroh's kind of moving on to a new stage of his life, whereas clearly Kyung still remembers the past very, very kind of vividly, and to a certain degree he is after kind of revenge, kind of wants justice for something we'll find out about shortly here. So what are your thoughts on the introduction of this new character here, Kyung?
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting to get to see a character from Iroh's past and how, he's interacting with them, and especially considering, sort of one that you thought wasn't really around anymore, to sort of come back. It definitely sort of, you can see it sort of throws Iroh for a bit of a loop here, and you can see that he's sort of already sort of on edge compared to sort of like when he first sort of saw June here, and he was a bit more sort of, positive about the situation here. So definitely feels like there's some, sort of animosity that's already here, and we'll get into it. What's this really sort of about here? But you can definitely see that he definitely has a plan in mind.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I do like that you can just immediately see from their initial dynamics of like Iroh has moved on to a new stage in his life, whereas Kyung lingers in the past. Is sort of the contrast between the two. But there's a quick scene here where like he is trying to show how in control he is, Kyung. He shows him around the tea blends. He gives Iroh some of this dragon tears blend, and Iroh likes it, of course. But it's like, hey, I like tea, but why have you brought me here, basic? So he explains what his role in the Fire Nation army is after this. That he wasn't just a soldier, he was part of a small elite force whose mission was to infiltrate Ba Sing Se before the walls came down, basically. So June notes, oh, you were a military spy. And yeah. And so this is why he has these skills that post surviving the war, he has, you know, rose in the ranks of this kind of underworld organization to run a cartel because he has all these skills from being this elite military spy who knows how to do all this stuff. And so there's a few explanations in all of this that are very interesting. But he explains that what they would do as part of the unit was that they'd get behind enemy lines, they'd disguise themselves, and attack from the kind of shadows, basically. Iroh asks, what about the rest of the unit? They're dead. So highlighting that of the people who are kind of left behind enemy lines, Kyung is effectively the only survivor, as we'll find out shortly. Iroh says he's sorry to hear that, but Kyung says, are you? And he says, my brothers and I snuck into the city and took out key targets. We did what was needed for the Fire Nation to be victorious. And then we'll get into, I suppose, the details as we go into the backstory in just a second here. But we get the proper intro on Kyung here, which I think is interesting. That like he's this more kind of elite Fire Nation soldier, kind of on the military spy side of things. Even like for the comic, the kind of implication of this kind of stealth assassin firebender, like just jumping down from a rooftop to like take out an Earth Kingdom soldier, is kind of a bit of kind of brutal imagery that you maybe don't typically associate with Avatar. Like we've seen, especially in like the novels, like assassin characters before, but it's interesting to see it depicted in a comic like this. But what are your thoughts on the kind of greater backstory, I suppose, here for Kyung?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, it makes sense that they would have to have some sort of intel, towards the city here, as, normally having sort of military operations here. So it definitely is something to see that there was sort of, some plan in place in terms of, helping them get down, sort of the wall, which we know that was like a huge endeavor, which is why it was such like a big thing when, Iroh sort of backed away after it. And, you can see here that even him backing away had his own sort of ramifications for his own sort of soldiers here. So it definitely is something to see that this was sort of a bigger thing at play. And yeah, it definitely is something that we, don't necessarily see as much of in the comics. They're usually, a bit more sort of on the positive side of things. But this, this story is about the history and the path, and these are the things that they had to do, whether they were sort of good or bad for what side that they were on in sort of the military. And neither side is completely clean, of course, in any of the situations. And this is just showing some of the darker elements there.
Mm-hmm. And then we get into what I think for most people they'll probably consider to be the most like important section of the book. That we actually get the visuals for the backstory during the siege of Ba Sing Se. And while they don't do the full thing, at least Liu 10 gets like a reference here, even if it's not like the full story. But straight away, the visual of just the wall broken through is like really cool to see in a comic. And it's Kyung narrating this, that he notes that like the outer wall of the city fell, victory was within our grasp, but instead of conquering the city, you walked away. You abandoned your post, leaving your soldiers trapped behind enemy lines. And Kyung notes that like, I thought you were the greatest general who had ever lived. I desperately wanted to be like you. We fought for you, General Iroh, and you abandoned us. So that's like the core of his issue here, is the idea that, the Iroh called for the retreat, but he didn't get everyone out because it was kind of in a way so sudden, and this is a kind of valid grievance for someone to have here. So it's interesting to kind of have this perspective on it, because we often view the Siege of Ba Sing Se as very like this, the tragedy for Iroh, like he lost his son, so everything he did there was okay because we're aware of why he did it. But then you see the other people that it did affect, that he got the people around him out, but this elite force behind enemy lines, did he get them out? And we see him kind of address that here. Kyung notes that Iroh notes to Kyung that, okay, like even though we breached the walls, our victory wasn't assured. The Earth Kingdom were still fighting viciously, and they showed the interesting visual of Earthbenders like standing within the crack of the wall, basically like doing crazy earthbending with the firebenders struggling. So, was it a guarantee? Probably not, but they had momentum up until Lu Ten died, and we do address that. We get a kind of portrait of Lu Ten here, and Iroh explains that when Lu Ten died, I lost my will to continue fighting, and specifically he says, fighting my father's bloody war. I finally felt the true cost. Children of all nations ground beneath the machine of useless conquest. He tried to get the retreat message to the elite force behind enemy lines, but he says, I take responsibility for that message never reaching you. And we'll cover the next part in just a second here. But what are your thoughts on this kind of 2-page spread here in the kind of flashback with, on one page it's like Kyung's kind of grievance with Iroh, and then it's Iroh explaining, I suppose, like his actions that day.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, some strong imagery there, just sort of getting across sort of the war and sort of the effect that it had on Iroh and just the forces in general there. I think that comes across pretty clear. And I think, we've always sort of felt the weight of it overall. And, I think, like you said, it definitely, we generally associate it with Lu Ten and sort of losing that and that sort of being the focus. But, this was a huge, military operation of one nation against another. And, there were tons of people sort of involved in this conflict here. So to see that, there was really such a huge thing going on, even with the wall down, it wasn't, such a thing that they sort of, had instant access to the city. We know, because we know the composition of the Earth Kingdom, that there's, walls and walls and walls. So, just because they got to the outer doesn't necessarily mean they had access to, like, the king and the Dai Li and everything else that was on the sort of like inner city side, just sort of like, you would see in sort of the Fire Nation there. So there definitely is, multiple steps in terms of, having sort of an assured victory here. But, of course, from, Kyung's perspective, they were sort of like, they were there, like they had it in grasp, and, maybe they had more plans, in order to sort of them to take the next set of walls and stuff like that. But from Iroh, you can see here that he didn't have any more, sort of strength or will to sort of keep going at this point.
Yeah. That's sort of the idea they kind of present here, is that like Kyung's force was probably like laying the path ahead of them for when they did break through. It would be easier when like they all connected together, that it wasn't just a case of like the wall comes down, these are the first soldiers through. No, there's been like sabotage and stuff like that going on the inside. But we do continue the emotional back and forth here. Iroh says, my son was taken from me. Not even victory over the Earth Kingdom could bring him back. I could not go on. And the really cutting part happens here when Kyung says, what about the soldiers under your command? Weren't we your sons too? And it's a really nice, it's a small panel, but it's just Iroh's face as this hits him. This is the kind of, in a way, the flaw of like overly focusing on Lu Ten in all of this. That like, okay, you lost your son, but I lost my entire unit, and like how many other people like died during the siege as well. And he's down on his knees, Iroh, and he says, I'm sorry, Kyung, I beg your forgiveness for the loss of your fellow soldiers. If there's anything I can do, please tell me. And he says, there is, you can die. And it's a pretty shocking kind of moment here, because you're like, oh, in a way, like, what do you mean by that? And we'll see what his kind of plan is in like a page or two. But this is, I think, really nicely done. I actually like the use of a lot of the black backgrounds here to get across that it's kind of pure emotion, this page, and what we're kind of going through here. Like, this is the, the cutting question that is like, this was a flawed moment for Iroh that day. As much as there's a tragedy and a, sadness that you have for the character this day, that he also, made decisions that didn't work the best for a lot of other people as well. But what are your thoughts on this kind of reveal, I suppose, for ultimately what Kyung wants?
Yeah, no, it definitely, feels like it's one of those little moments here, especially for Iroh, him, sort of thinking that he had come to terms with a lot of things that have happened in his past here. And we can see that, even at this point, there's still a lot that, he has to sort of, figure out as well. And this is one of those instances where it sort of comes back to him and, maybe he thought he was, truly ready to face this, but no, maybe he wasn't at this sort of juncture here. So it's definitely impactful. You definitely see the emotion come across in all these panels here. And no, with him saying, the one thing that he can do for him, it definitely sort of, makes you wonder what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So next page, then we have Iroh. He slowly kind of gets up to his feet and he says, "No, I refuse. If that terrible war has taught me anything, it's that to continue to take lives, even in the pursuit of honor for my nation, is wrong. I am an old man, but my life is still worth living. I refuse to give it up to atone for my past mistakes." And Kyung, like, very much like he's been the whole time, just says, kind of, how convenient that you can say something like that with such confidence. But I like that Iroh kind of shows his wisdom, that like he has, I suppose, truly accepted this kind of second stage of his life of like, no, I don't deserve to die for a decision I made in my kind of first life here. I still have stuff I can do here. Dying to atone is in my mind kind of like never really the right choice overall. So he's not going to accept just being killed for this, which I like. Is it's a strong moment for Iroh, even if it is him sort of like kind of having to defend kind of his mistakes from the past here. It's an interesting position to put Iroh in, but I like that they show his strength as a character at the same time as the weaker moments as well. But what are your thoughts on his reaction to kind of, you have to die?
Yeah, no, it definitely shows his resolve as a character. And, I think, Iroh's always had a strong sense of character, right? Like that's sort of been his thing. And, he tries to impart that wisdom onto other people as well. And, I think he would even try that on Kyung if, he had a better, sort of chance or connection, or if Kyung could see things from a different perspective. But, at this point in time, it's definitely not something that, his sort of former, sort of army person would have actually sort of accepted the situation here. So I think it's good that Iroh has this idea that he can still do more by being around, and we know eventually he does get to a point where he's ready to pass on and go on to the next sort of state. As far as the stories continue. So it's good to see that that's not where he's at right now as a character.
Mm-hmm. At this point, Kyung basically wants Iroh subdued, so he has his guards kind of like capture Iroh. And June steps in at this point and is like, you don't have to kill him. But Kyung is like, actually, my plan is to basically like make him suffer for a few days and then I'll kill him. She again defends and says, like, he's just a tea shop owner. Your revenge is meant for a man who doesn't exist anymore. But Kyung is just like, take your payment and leave. Like, you're done. Like, you don't need it. I don't need to know your opinion, bounty hunter, basically. And we get this kind of interesting moment where she does take the money and leave, but you can tell, especially on the final panel, she's really deep in thought about this, that maybe for one of the first times in her life, like this, she feels like this is a bounty I feel really bad about kind of having kind of, handed in, basically. So definitely creates the kind of like the crux of the big decision that June is going to have to make going forward here, of like, if she wants her own kind of like second life in a way, to make a new choice, she kind of has to make amends for this decision that she makes kind of here. But what are your thoughts on this June and Kyung scene?
Yeah, no, I think this is, it's a turning point for June as a character, seeing this sort of situation go down that she doesn't really necessarily agree with. No, maybe she should have taken the money earlier and not sort of, been a part of seeing this whole situation play down. But, it seemed like that was just sort of the steamroll effect of the whole situation and how it was happening here. So it definitely feels like, she's now on the understanding side of seeing that, things in the past don't necessarily reflect your sort of current self or your future self. But Kyung is definitely stuck in the past in the situation here, and she just sort of keeps her idea of her little mantra in the beginning of it's all about the money, and that's what she came here to do. And despite her reluctance, she goes.
Mm-hmm. Next, we have June. She heads to Fawn's farm to visit her, like she promised, and she gets to first of all meet the llama pacas here. So this is our first time seeing this animal on screen here. Previously referenced in the Yang Chen novels, but in a kind of odd way as like a location llama pacas crossing rather than actually like seeing them involved. So we meet Sweet Dumpling, the matriarch of the llama pacas, and June just gets to see how nice life on the farm is here with Fawn. Fawn is doing really well for herself. She asks about like Iroh, like where is he? What was his name? He seemed like a nice person, but June says he's not a nice person. He's done terrible things in his past. So she's very deep in thought about this. She's trying to almost maybe explain away why she doesn't need to go after Iroh. Fawn, I think, takes the right approach, saying that, funny, so have I, done terrible things in the past. I've taken plenty of bounties from bad people in my lifetime, clients who I knew were hurting innocent people. Remember what used to be said about me. And the quote is, Fawn's so heartless she'll turn in her own mother for a bounty. But Fawn continues and says, I like to believe it's possible for people to change, to make amends for what they've done in their past life. But you've got to actually want to change. And taking the first step towards a new life, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. And June, this really makes her think, but it also makes her make her mind up as well. So she puts the bounty that she just got, the money on the table, she gives it to Fawn and is like, hey, I'm going to hire you guys for one final job. We're going to break an old man out of the Wu Yi cartel's prison. And Fawn is going to give her a friend of the crew discount to make this happen. So I really like this, especially page 55. It's kind of interesting that in a book that actually features Iroh, it's kind of like Fawn who actually delivers the key piece of wisdom to June in the end, though Iroh has kind of roughly said the same thing in a different way to her before. But what are your thoughts on this trip to the farm here for June?
The trip to the farm is great. I think it's a good way for June to get to see that there is another sort of life out there, and especially for someone of her kind and her background. I think that's the point that really gets made here, because like you said, Iroh did basically say the exact same thing here, but June being able to see it sort of work out in reality, and already feeling sort of bad about the whole situation, it definitely sort of sets her on the path to actually sort of wanting to do something better about what she's done in the past, and sort of help out someone who has also done something better with their life going forward, despite their sort of past history here. So I really like that this was a good way for June to finally sort of realize the situation at hand.
Yeah, I like that this book is just very clear about the whole idea of just like, you are not defined by your past, and that, like we just saw in like the previous scene, you are allowed to just be like, I have changed from what I used to be. Like, I don't need to die because of like what I did previously. Like, I made the big changes already, and I'm actually going to kind of commit to that. And this is June starting on a new path here overall, which is kind of nice. So from here, we get the planning of the big raid here on the Wu Yi cartel. So the plan here is multiple. They're going to, of course, break Iroh out, but they also want to get rid of the Wu Yi cartel. So they want to properly get rid of them here. They want to free the tea, is another part of this. So Fawn and her crew are going to go in. June is going to be involved, of course, as well. And we see this happen, and it happens quite quickly. Of course, we see like Wei comes in with the llama pakas, and Sweet Dumpling just kicks a bunch of these guards out of the way. They head in, and the funny thing that's kind of also very thematic is that these really skilled former bounty hunters, it seems like they don't have their old equipment anymore. They start to use like their kind of farming equipment to do all the fighting with. And that's how they still manage to defeat the cartel as we kind of go through these action sequences, which I think is a cool kind of visual thing throughout the book, and that they really have accepted this new life for themselves. It's not that they just have like a box with all their old stuff in it. They've moved on. But in the action, June heads down and finds Iroh. But let's talk about this action scene. What are your thoughts on the planning and then the actual raid on the cartel that we see here?
Yeah, no, this feels like a sort of your classic sort of planning out a mission and heist sort of thing. Just that they're doing it in theory for slightly better reasons, right? They're doing it to free someone who's been in prison, and they're doing it to sort of, set free the situation of, this harbor town that's sort of being sort of bullied and controlled by this cartel here. So, they sort of have that sort of, undertone of, doing the right thing, even if they're maybe going about it sort of the wrong way here. So, they have that aspect, and that sort of, makes the situation okay in the situation. And the fact that, they try to get, the people who don't want to fight to sort of give them a chance to get away, they have that sort of aspect there. But no, it's cool to see them use all their different sort of skills in different situations here. Like you said, they use sort of their farming tools in order to sort of defeat people, because they're just that good that they don't need to sort of figure out, where their old sort of weapons are and stuff like that. They can use anything and sort of be the better people here. So, we're just sort of highlighting their skills, right? Which is, sort of the whole point, that they were like this great crew before, and they still are a great crew, just that now they focus on farming, right? Except for in this one case here. So no, I thought that was a great way to sort of, highlight this sort of group and their abilities, and, a good bit of an action scene.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, June meets Iroh downstairs. He has been beaten up, and he's just happy that he's being rescued at all. Kyung follows June down the stairs. He has the key, of course, and is like, hey, you betrayed me. I won't be using your services again. This time she finally says it. My bounty hunting days are numbered anyway. Iroh's like, oh, so you are considering retirement? And she's like, no, but Kyung attacks her. So we get Kyung versus June here, which is a kind of cool fight scene. And she also kind of follows the same trend of like, she doesn't use her typical fighting equipment. She doesn't use her whip. Instead, she takes out the scarf that she was given, which is made of llama paka wool, and she gets in really close against a powerful firebender and just starts kind of wrapping him up in this. And she eventually kind of wraps his arms around his head and kind of ties him to the ground, with the idea being that they can get away. He will burn through it, but because it's kind of flame resistant, it's going to take him a little bit of time to burn his way out of this scarf, rather than it would be instantaneous with another material. So June and Iroh escape kind of back upstairs, basically, and when they get outside, it's basically like Fan and her crew have completely taken over. They're in complete control. It's been a successful mission, but we will still have to deal with Kyung when he gets back upstairs, is sort of the idea here. So I do like this, because they definitely did a good job of building up that Kyung is like, he's an elite soldier here, like an assassin. So like, he's much better than your typical random Fire Nation soldier. But June is super skilled herself, and she does the I suppose this is kind of what Korra does in one of the book 2 episodes, when she's fighting her like fellow Southerners as well. So there's a cool reference there as well. Always cool to see. But she tries a new style to a certain degree, and it works for her, highlighting that this is the right way thematically with the book. But yeah, what are your thoughts on June versus Kyung?
Yeah, no, I thought that was very nice. I don't know if it's like a direct callback, but it feels like it's a thing that's sort of like it's a good way of incapacitating someone. And if he wasn't a firebender, he wouldn't have probably been able to get out that as quick as he was able to. So it's a nice way to sort of, de-escalate the situation rather quickly here, and especially since they seem to be sort of pressed for time, at least that's, their initial sort of idea here. It works really well. And, June she's also very skilled as well. So, despite him being, skilled, I think, she's able to, quickly sort of take hold of the situation here, which seems to be her way of doing things in general, like, just her bounty hunting in general, like why prolong things when you can do it, rather quickly. So no, I think that worked pretty well.
hmm So Kyung gets back upstairs. He's been freed from the scarf, and he starts talking to June, like trying to appeal to her of like, you've turned your back on your people, and she points out that you are not my people. But he's like, no, I'm what's left of the world you used to be a part of, the few who answered to no one. Now you're standing beside a Fire Nation general who would see the end of everything you claim to hold dear. He's everything wrong with this pathetic civilized world. And he just starts ranting. And June gets very annoyed at this and finally kind of gives her big response here to all of this. And she says, the world is different now. Everything has changed, including the people in it. But I'm starting to see that isn't a bad thing. Former Fire Nation generals can become tea shop owners. Spies can reinvent themselves as the head of a powerful tea cartel. And bounty hunters can find a place they call home with people they call family. So I like her being able to like link everything together of like, yeah, Fawn, Iroh, but also now using Kyung of like, you did reinvent yourself. You just lost yourself in this one aspect of your past. Otherwise, like, you had made the jump forward as well. You just need to adjust your approach in the same way that June basically has here as well. So the theme of the book kind of all comes together in this of like, you need to be able to make the step forward, the toughest step. He in a way hasn't realized that he has already done this. He hasn't adjusted his kind of mentality that way, but this is the kind of ending of the book, basically, to a certain degree. There's still a few pages left. We'll get into it. But what are your thoughts on this big kind of character discussion here that we have?
Yeah, no, I thought this was really good. I really like that, June's finally able to see past, sort of everything that's happened to her in the past and is able to sort of begin to sort of move forward. And she recognizes that, other people have moved past that and, have, made a better life for themselves. And even him, being the leader of a powerful, tea cartel is a pretty huge endeavor. And, he might not have been able to do that without his past and, sort of, the experience that he had, right? But it seems like he definitely still has that, edge, that history of sort of his past and sort of what got him to the point that he's at that he isn't quite able to let go. His revenge has been his sort of fuel for everything that he's done, not necessarily wanting it for like the betterment of his own self and his own sort of life going forward there. So without that, he seems to be missing this one key element and he's not able to sort of let go of the past. And that's sort of, the crux of this issue here. And, he thinks that he's, sort of keeping things alive the way that they used to be. And that's sort of what he wants and what June wants. But that's, June is realizing that that's not actually what she wants. She can see a better path forward at this point.
Mm-hmm. She gives him an opportunity to kind of stand down, but no, he wants the consequences, basically. So yeah, June versus Kyung, round two. Fan throws her the sickle, I guess, and they have a quick fight here, which is mostly June realizing that, like, hey, you think because you're a bender you have the advantage over me, but non-benders kind of know when to call in a friend to fight. So it's kind of revealed here. She's just been sort of distracting Kyung while Iroh kind of charges up an attack here, and she gets behind Iroh as he just, I guess, does this like crazy fire uppercut move that just sends Kyung into the wall, and so he's kind of taken out with one hit here, and Iroh's just like, I needed that, June. And yeah, he has earned this, of course. And he says, I'll always remember the moment you chose to stand beside me. But she says, you made a bad first impression, Iroh, but you're all right. And this is where we get the wrap up here. But what are your thoughts on this round two of the fight here?
Yeah, no, it's a good way. I mean, it's a nice just sort of short way to show this and to sort of get Iroh a little bit more of a, I guess, even he can get a little bit of revenge off of, him, sort of being imprisoned and beat up a bit as well here. It would have been cool to see what the actual move is that he did, since it seems to be pretty effective, and they show it from a distance here to sort of show the impact that it had on the sort of on Kuang here. But no, I think this works as a quick way to sort of wrap it up.
Mm-hmm. From there, we basically get this is Iroh's solution to all of this, because there's been a bit of a mess made of the kind of Wu Yi cartel, and even though we don't like it, they have been controlling the tea trade and making it happen all this time. So Iroh comes up with the solution that, what about we kind of get rid of the Wu Yi cartel, or turn it into a legitimate business? Like, it's not controlled in this way. There's no protection money type stuff. It's just honest buying and selling of tea for the right prices. And I think Fawn and her crew should be in charge of this. So that's going to be the kind of solution to all of this. They're going to kind of take over the Wu Yi cartel, maybe change it to being the Doxia tea trading company or something like that. And they've already proved that they can do this because they have all this kind of vegetables, but then also like the llama paka wool. They can do the same thing with tea, and they can turn Doxia Harbor into a place that's more kind of meaningful going forward. It doesn't have to be the last underworld kind of city in the world. It can be a proper trade kind of harbor in the world, and they all agree to this, of like they're going to expand their business and free the tea this way is the kind of solution basically. And then just on this last little sequence before we go into like the epilogue, basically is just the idea of what are we going to do with the bounty on Kyung, basically. But June denies it and is just like, no, I need to step forward. I can't take another bounty. So Iroh's like, okay, I'll take the money, invest it into the Jasmine Dragon, because my customers need the best. And I'm actually looking to hire some outside help. And we're left with this bit of a mystery of like, he clearly is going to do something with June and the Jasmine Dragon, but what is it? And we'll get that in the epilogue. But what are your thoughts on this as the kind of solution here to the other problem of like the supply issues are going to be fixed by tea not being run by a cartel, but instead by reformed bounty hunters operating a legal tea trade business?
Yeah, no, I mean that seems kind of classic Avatar in terms of like turning something that was bad into something good, and just happen to have the right people in place to take over in this sort of situation here. And they do, they've said that they, it was a struggle to start their business in the beginning, but now they've been pretty successful. So we have that history that they've already been doing better from themselves, and they have a group of people here, and it seems like they said they were already going to expand. So I think it was it's a nice way of sort of pushing forward and sort of trying to reform this city, in sort of the nicest way possible, at least with the people who are, willing to have this change take over and sort of, move things forward. So I think it's probably one of the nicer ways to sort of like try and reform this city that was, pretty sort of cutthroat as far as, most people are considered. So I like that they, it's a way of them to sort of, make nice of sort of a bad situation. And I think, that works for the story they're going for.
Mm-hmm. We then cut to the epilogue 6 months later, which is a pretty big time jump for the comics, where it's been a pretty tight timeline thing. I wonder what we're doing here of like, is this 6 months and we're now in the imbalance time period, or is this like 6 months after like imbalance? I don't think it matters, because like it's ultimately very specific, because there's only really like Iroh and June who are like important characters in the scene. But it's just meant to highlight it. Some time has passed. June has been in this new role for a little bit, and we'll get into it here. So yeah, we're back into Jasmine Dragon. Iroh's serving tea, and he basically reveals they have much more of a menu. Basically, they have all these special blends. He talks about the pearl oolong from the furthest shores of the Fire Nation, matcha green tea from the Kalau Mountains, and a new blend from of tea harvested in an area that the locals call the Swamp, and it is a deliciously swampy tea. Then June arrives in, sits down to have some tea with Iroh, and hands him over this kind of package, basically, which is 3 jars filled with other different teas, which she explains that she had to climb a mountain and dodge a leopard caribou to get these. I hope they're worth it. He shares some of one of these with her, with the idea like, hey, you did all the work to get these, might as well share it with you. And she reveals that she is now the official, the Jasmine Dragon's official tea discoverer, and that she has done more traveling doing this job for 6 months than she has in her last 5 years being a bounty hunter. So she's getting the action, the traveling that she wants, and probably actually a little bit more fighting as well, doing this role, which is perfect for her. But by the end of the book, the idea seems to be that she has the Jasmine Dragon as a place she can go back to talk to her friend Iroh, or she can go to Doxia to be with her other friends, and that might be where she eventually maybe settles down in the future. And the idea is like, for now, she has this like proper role where she doesn't have to be a bounty hunter anymore, but she can do a lot of the things that she used to do, but she seems to have an idea about what she wants to kind of properly do now going forward. And yeah, we just end with the idea that Iroh calls her a friend. They are friends. She is officially retired as a bounty hunter by the end of the book, as they share tea in the Jasmine Dragon. So what are your thoughts on the final few pages of the book here, the reveal of June as someone who hunts down rare teas for the Jasmine Dragon?
Yeah, no, I think this is a nice way to sort of bring it to a close here, because we know that she likes the action, she likes traveling, she likes, going around the different places, maybe a bit of fighting in there as well. And, this seems like this, has everything, sort of wrapped up in one. And, she's probably being, like she's saying, she's, getting paid just as well as before. So I think this was a nice way for them to close it, to have her still involved with the group and everything. So, maybe we'll see more of her in the future. Maybe we won't. But we know that, she has some connections. She has, some roots per se. Where exactly are there? We don't know, because she's still sort of like on the move and stuff like that. But, that's her type of character, and that's sort of what she wants to do. So I think that was a nice way to sort of, bring to the close here, and to sort of, show their ending of or the beginning of their real sort of relationship here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it's an interesting ending here. So, confirming that the two of them are friends at the end here, like you say, it keeps June in play to where if we do more comics, if we return to doing trilogies, June seems to be relatively accessible, which is kind of interesting. She seems to be more on the kind of good side of things, I guess. So if we need use of Nyla, she's there through Iroh. The connection is clearly there. So yeah, pretty good. I think my only maybe slight criticism is, again, kind of going back to the flashback stuff, is that it feels like there's a present day story, and then, well, we're talking about June, we might as well do some backstory, but they're not, I think, as heavily interlinked as you maybe expect from a book that actually goes into backstory. So I was maybe just hoping that there would be something at around like the 3/4 way through the book where she's in the middle of some of the fights, or maybe after she talks to Fawn, she considers maybe something her mother once said to her, or something her father said to her while they were bounty hunting, that helps her make the kind of jump forward. I think that would have been the thing to kind of just take the book over the edge into this like really, really, really good kind of situation here, just because, yeah, there's the option to do more with June, but it should also be noted that like we haven't followed up on any of the other one-shot kind of plot points since the books have come out. So when are we going to come back to June? And there might have been an option to just do a little bit more elsewhere. Like, I'm kind of a little bit surprised that Nyla wasn't like used that much in the book. I think that origin would have been something really nice to just include here, just because I think people would have liked to have seen like baby Nyla. That would have been a cool little detail. But nothing too much of a problem, because I do think the present day story is good. That is a good theme to latch onto with Iroh, Fan, June, and even Kyung to a certain degree. Just the idea of, who they were during the war, who they are now after the war, and that you can have a different life. It's okay. You just have to kind of have the bravery to a certain degree to make the step forward, to choose to do something different, that you are not defined by what you did before. I think that is a good theme that they kind of worked on quite well. I just would have maybe liked to have seen the flashback latch into that as well. But what are your thoughts on that kind of idea?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I mean, the idea of having, a little bit more integration with her story and her character and her history would have been nice. If for sure, it could have been. I think the idea of using it for her decision, if there was, a way where her parents, had that sort of change of heart in their own life. I mean, I don't know, maybe it could have been used in sort of their initial sort of story, when they initially got together, but I don't know. It seems like, at least where, conjecture wise, that, maybe they never, maybe, or at least the father never got to that point where, he was able to sort of move past the past. And, maybe that would have been something to just note on itself, that her father never got to that point, and that she, was able to get to that point. So that could have been, something to consider there. But no, I think, overall, for the most part, getting a bit of her character history, having it interwoven with, Iroh's sort of story here, the present day, like you're saying, it is pretty good. You do get to see this, she is, a character that could be used in the future, if they have, a real use for her. So, I like that that's an option there. It would have been cool to have more scenes with Nyla. I guess, their way of avoiding that is saying that, Nyla couldn't be in the city, but, they had the llama pakas in there, and, they're animals as well. So clearly they weren't, completely following the rules there. And, they're reformed bounty hunters anyway. So when do they fully follow rules anyway? But no, that's just sort of how they chose for it to go here. But no, for the most part, I was pretty happy with it.
So yeah, that's most of the discussion here. Yeah, I think it's a good one shot comic. I suppose the final topic is just how would you rate this compared to the other 4 one shots that we have so far? Do you think this is among the better ones, or do you prefer some of the other one shots that we have?
Yeah, I was thinking about that before too, and I think for the most part, I like this one. I think, I don't know if it's necessarily better than some of the other ones because of, the characters involved and sort of the history they have and sort of what they go through that we sort of have been, sort of wondering from the past. But I think, for some of them, this definitely, beats out, some of them just because of, the 2 characters involved and sort of the fact that we do get a little bit more of the history, a little bit more of the current world building that's being changed in this current era. So I think that there's, even for this being sort of a one shot with, a minor character being one of the main characters in this story, at least, I think this has a good bit to offer than we would have otherwise thought, at least, than I thought when I first sort of heard about this story in the beginning, considering, we're not going to get sort of the full thing on Iroh because that's, something that they're not ready to do. And we have a character that, there's, she's cool and stuff like that, but, there wasn't, that much depth to her, from the show itself. She was just sort of a plot device type character that sort of helped the story and was cool in that episode. And, it's still a highlight episode. And I think, for some people that might even be one of their favorite episodes. But no, it didn't have a huge effect on sort of the grand scheme of things. But I think it worked well for this story.
Mm-hmm. And then I suppose the final thing is that obviously this is, I suppose, the second of the second trilogy of one shots. Any thoughts on what the 6th one will be, the third of this trilogy? Like, there's not really a clear theme necessarily. Like, you can say, like, okay, Fire Nation Royal Family, because it's like Azula, Iroh, and then whoever the next one will be. There's a little bit maybe of a theme of, like, redemption across, like, the Azula one, like, potential redemption in the future. This being about you can move on from the past to do something different, and that's maybe something they could do. But any idea what character you'd like to see for the sixth one shot?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a few that they could do if they wanted to go with some minor characters, but I don't know. I don't know. I would want them to do something that sort of leads them into the next sort of bigger junction of comics if they're, ever going to go back to that sort of, series of things. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, like I think the most effective comic would be like probably like say like Zuko with May, just to kind of get them back together, because that feels like an open plot thing where you probably just need to address that before you go into like new
Someone
content
mentioned
and
that. Yeah.
explain that. And then I think yeah, May and Ty Lee, I think people would like to see get focus in a one shot again. Like Sokka as like a main character, I think could probably use it, especially if they maybe do it like this, where like they pair Sokka up with someone else, like maybe Sokka and Suki doing something, or you know, Sokka and like Chitsang or something like that to explain that. That'd be cool. Did he actually do anything? Why was he in prison in the first place? He's innocent. That whole idea. But yeah, the assumption would be New York Comic Con will be when they reveal that, because otherwise I don't know what publishing announcements they actually have. But yeah, that has been the podcast. So we will be back with future podcasts to cover The Reckoning of Roku. We'll do the usual coverage. It'll be probably over the course of 3 podcasts, each covering a third of the book. So it works out quite well this time. I think we're like 360 pages exactly. So we'll cover about 120 pages per episode of the podcast, and it'll work out pretty nicely that way. But for this episode of the podcast, it's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye.